Horizon Gents, I'm Lucy Reacts, and this is Europe, the First Crusade, on to Jerusalem, Extra History Part 6, by the channel Extra Credits. Yes, we are on the 6th and the last part of the First Crusade. There has been so many layers to this First Crusade in 6 parts, I guess. Usually a series follows a trend. This does not. At the first, this was so fucking hilarious, right? The People's Crusade, that was just ridiculous and stupid. Right, it went really chaotic. Then the princes and the real soldiers joined in. Seemed about stable enough, right? And then, you know, what I thought started to happen, right? They started to infight a lot. The People's Crusade basically gave the Turks idea that these are not serious people. Obviously, that gave them advantage, so they arrived really close. And now still infighting is happening, and they are going to try to take Jerusalem. Will they take to Jerusalem? Will they not? I don't know, but I guess we'll see in this. But also people are constantly telling me this is one of the most successful crusade there is, with this kind of a clusterfuck that it was. Makes me think how disastrous others were if this was the most successful one. But yeah, let's do this one. Remember people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe so I know which type of videos to react to more. 75% of you that watch regularly my videos are not subscribed. So just, you know, click the subscribe button, I guess. So I know, should I react to history videos, science videos, which videos, I guess. Check out the other reaction I did. There's a link in the description with all of my videos. Check out the cast over plays like history, interhistorian, Crusade, nutshell, CGP Grey. And yeah, let's watch it.
Last we left off, the Crusaders had just taken Antioch. Now they have to hold it. There's just a small series of problems. 1, the Turkish army bearing down on them has now surrounded Antioch. 2, the Turkish garrison in Antioch still holds the citadel, which is inside the city walls. 3, Antioch is almost out of food after that prolonged siege the Crusaders themselves put it under. 4, the day before they took Antioch, Stephen of Blois just decided that everything was hopeless and abandoned the crusade, for which he would be mocked for the rest of his days. 5, to compound his desertion, on his way back, Stephen ran into the Byzantine relief army and told them all hope was lost. So the Byzantines were like, okay, and promptly turned around to defend their own territory.
Oh my god.
So there would be no Byzantine...
he didn't just fuck up his own crusade. He just went back and told the, you know, Byzantines like, okay, everything's lost. Don't go there. So no Byzantine, you know, reinforcement now. Holy shit.
Reinforcements arriving. But for 4 straight days, the Turks assaulted the walls, and for 4 days, the beleaguered Crusaders held. Bohemond desperately racing between containing the Turks in the citadel and trying to hold the wall. Godfrey rallying the troops. The Turks attacked in waves to keep their forces fresh.
Bohemond feels like the guy of all of them is the one who's actually really good on the battlefield, right? Because he's been winning wars a lot compared to the others. Winning battles.
But there were already too few Crusaders to hold the great ramparts, and so they fought without relief. After 4 days of vicious combat, the Turks decided, you know what, let's just starve these guys out. So, once again, starvation set in, and Crusader morale began to drop. Things looked bleak, but then, a sign. An impoverished local mystic claimed to have had a vision of St. Andrew telling him where the Lance of Longinus, the holy lance that supposedly pierced Christ's side, was buried. So the Crusaders started to dig a big hole.
Yeah, hunger do that to you. Hunger gives you hallucination like that. So yeah, especially when you believe with all your heart that, you know, Jesus Christ and all the different type of angels are literally with you because you're on a holy crusade. That tends to happen. And also starving the city. Julius Caesar started this shit, right? Starving the city to submission. And I see in every war that the people uses this. That is something.
Hole in the floor of the Church of St. Peter in Antioch. The mystic jumped down into the pit, and lo and behold, he pulled out a hunk of iron. "We found it," he said, "the head of the Lance of Longinus." Bohemond and Tancred were skeptical, and Bishop Adhemar was having none of it. They already had one of those holy lance things back in Rome, but the ordinary soldiers were inspired. Raymond declared it a sign that they would prevail. 13 days later, with food running out, the gaunt and...
Wait a minute. Was that a strategic thing they did? Like, okay, morale is going down. We have to do something. We are on a holy crusade. Let's give them some holy sign. So the soldiers are amped up, I guess.
Wild-eyed Crusaders rode out of the gates to attack the Turks. Carrying the Lance of Longinus and with the fervor of men otherwise doomed, the Crusaders let out a great yell and charged the vastly superior Turkish force. 6 columns of men, each led by one of the lords of the crusade, poured out of the city gates and slammed into the Turkish line. Later, soldiers would speak of having seen the saints riding amongst them,
Damn.
carrying banners of white and riding steeds like snow. And with desperation they fought. The Turks lit a great fire to drive them back, but through flame and smoke they fought on, until at last, against all odds, the Turkish line collapsed. The
Whoa.
Crusaders fell upon the Turkish camp and the stores held there. The Crusade had survived. Unbeknownst to the Crusaders, though, they'd had one advantage. While the Turkish host appeared to them to be one mighty army, it was actually, like the crusading force, made up of many smaller armies with their own commanders. And it turns out that many of those commanders would have rather seen the Crusaders keep Antioch than have it fall into the hands of their superior. So as soon as the battle began to turn, many of them used it as an excuse to just desert and flee. But no matter the cause, the Crusaders had overcome the last great obstacle between—
Wait a minute, this is not Ottoman Empire, right? So is there an empire, or are these just different kingdoms, like how these different princes are? Because I think that's how it is, right? Different commanders, different kingdoms, but they are all, since it's holy war, all Turks are, together, even though they have their indifferences. Because I'm pretty sure there was no empire like Ottoman Empire around the time, right? If it was Ottoman Empire, there would be a problem, because it's under one banner.
them and Jerusalem. Now the crusade would be complete in no time, right? Not exactly. Raymond and Bohemond immediately began to dispute who would get to keep Antioch. Bohemond, always a little slyer than Raymond, eventually won out, after months and months of arguing while the crusade languished in Antioch. During that time, Hugh was sent off to talk to the Byzantine Empire about rejoining the crusade, but Hugh was never Alexius's favorite, and his pleas seemed to have little impact. So what did Hugh do? Instead of returning to the crusade, as originally planned, he basically said, "Well, I'm out. Peace," and wandered off back to Europe, for which he would be mocked for the rest of his days. And that's not all.
I mean, can you really blame those guy, the first guy who basically deserted? I mean, I know you need to be more smart when you're on the battlefield, but they were against really bad odds, right? If that guy didn't say that, okay, look, this is the, metal, holy metal or something, so, gods are with us or whatever, what he did to morale up every soldier there was, Turks would have overpowered them. It's only because of, boosting morale of like that, they actually held the line, and that was miraculous. Otherwise, they were already starving at that point. So that guy basically who deserted first probably thought, I'm not going to sacrifice my men, this is doomed, and just walked off. I mean, you can make fun of that, but it's not really that far-fetched of a decision. Same thing with this guy. He went to the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire is like, I'm not hearing you. It just didn't take him seriously. So of course he's going to like, without Byzantine Empire, we are fucked, and just walked off, I guess. I don't know. And since, these people, don't really trust their other like Bohemond and everybody else, I mean, they can't have really faith that they are going to win the crusade. Right, and I don't know if they're going to win it or not, but feels like Bohemond is really good, military general type of guy who, does great battle on the field, I guess. But still, I can't really blame those guys for deserting. It's like, okay, this is chaotic from the start. It doesn't feel like even the Byzantines are not coming. And why is Byzantine Emperor not coming? Right, he's the one who started all this shit. Doesn't matter if he likes the guy or not. It's the whole crusade, right? You don't have to like him. The crusade is still on. Go there, help, I guess.
During the months spent sitting around Antioch, a sickness passed through the camp, and Bishop Adhemar took ill and died, leaving the crusade as a whole functionally leaderless. At this point, Raymond, deciding that he possessed the Holy Land—
Wait a minute, Bishop was the leader? I mean, yeah, since it's a religious war, in a way, he represented God's side, so he was a leader in that sense. Yeah, kind of makes sense.
Started the crusade south again. This decision was in some ways precipitated by one of the grimmest moments in the crusade, the siege of the nearby city of Marat. After massacring the local population, while Bohemond and Raymond disputed who owned the place, the Crusaders were reduced to such a state of hunger that even the Western chroniclers talk in appalled tones about them roasting and boiling the dead Turks to eat. So, with only one major incident of cannibalism behind him, Raymond came to the conclusion that he had been ordained by God to lead the Crusade south toward Jerusalem, and started trekking through the country. But only Tancred and Robert of Normandy agreed to follow. Jerusalem was in Shia hands at this point in time, so the crusade actually passed—
Wait a minute, Robert of Normandy, isn't that the guy from Flanders F?
To follow.
Or is that the same thing? I don't know. Because he felt like from the start to me more competent guy because he didn't make so many mistakes, I guess.
Jerusalem was in Shia hands at this point in time, so the crusade actually passed through most of the countryside without incident. The local Sunni population even helped supply them in the hopes that the crusaders would both leave them alone and give the Shia a good kicking. But then Raymond decided that he needed to attack the town of Arca. which is pretty random as it had no bearing on them getting to Jerusalem. Of course, it would have some bearing if you were secretly planning to subvert the Crusade in order to take over Tripoli and set up a kingdom of your own there, but we'll never know if that was Raymond's true intention because he utterly failed. In fact, he failed so spectacularly that Tancred and Robert left him to go join Godfrey, whom Raymond promptly asked for help. The combined Robert, Tancred, Godfrey army showed up, but it still wasn't enough to prosecute the siege, so the crusade just kinda stalled out again. Until a clergyman in Godfrey's army basically challenged the mystic who had found the Holy Lance to a monk duel, and the mystic agreed to undergo an ordeal by fire. Tragically, said mystic was not protected by God during the ordeal, and burned to death, and the lance was discredited.
Are they actually stupid? I mean, I get it in the stories, in the books and everything. People talk about these prophets, this and this, some, holy saint or something went through some kind of a, fire test or whatever and they survive. That's fine for the books and the stories. Has anybody ever witnessed somebody actually come out alive from walking inside the fire, ever? No, then why challenge that? I mean, you... This is fucked up, man. They just suddenly a holy duel, I guess, started suddenly between all these wars and battle. And one of them just actually walked into the fire and burned up. Of course he did.
Most of Raymond's credibility had come from possessing that lance, and now, since the lance was no longer a sacred object, thanks to the clergy beatdown, Godfrey took over and said, let's get back to going south toward Jerusalem, huh? So, without further incident, other than one moment where Tancred popped over to conquer Bethlehem just real quick, the Crusaders finally made it to Jerusalem. But by this point, the crusade was in tatters. Baldwin was up in Edessa doing his own thing. Hugh had abandoned the crusade. Bohemond was holding down Antioch. The Byzantines were just done with the whole affair. Stephen had run off, and Ottomar was dead.
Byzantine was done. You started this shit, man.
There weren't really a lot of crusaders left to do the besieging. To add to this, the Fatimid forces holding the city had poisoned all the nearby wells, so the Crusaders were also rapidly succumbing to thirst.
Whoa.
The remaining princes decided they'd have to take Jerusalem by assault or not at all. There's no way they could maintain a siege. But there was still one other problem. The surrounding countryside had been stripped bare. There was no lumber to build siege towers or scaling ladders. Things looked pretty hopeless. But just then, a group of Genoese ships arrived at a nearby port and saved the day. The Genoese agreed to dismantle their ships and bring the timber as quickly as possible to Jerusalem. The crusade wasn't over yet. The siege...
I mean, by this point, right, any Christian guy comes around, he's gonna help because it's about Jerusalem. Oh, you're trying to take Jerusalem? Fuck it, I'll help. Even if it doesn't matter, I'm gonna help, right? Because you don't need convincing much once actually an army is at the Jerusalem trying to take it over. And yeah, as in the previous video, I thought, why are Muslims trying to keep Jerusalem? But apparently, Jerusalem is for them a holy site too. I mean, I don't know much about, Islam and Christian in detail, but, I guess you can trace their heritage back to, I guess, same God, right? I remember somebody saying that the Christian God and Islamic God are the same God. So I guess in that way, it makes sense, I guess.
Towers began to rise. On July 13th, 1099 CE, the assault on Jerusalem began. The Crusaders split into two forces, one led by Raymond, the other on the opposite side of the city led by Godfrey and Tancred. As Raymond's tower began to roll forward, it was battered and nearly destroyed. Raymond's assault had failed, but Godfrey and Tancred had been far more crafty. Like Raymond, they too had been erecting a siege tower on their side, and seeing this, the
Where's the guy from Flanders? Robert.
defenders had prepared their defenses all along the wall facing it. But unlike Raymond, the night before the assault, Godfrey and Tancred had disassembled and rebuilt their siege equipment in front of a totally different part of the wall. When the assault began, the section of the wall they attacked was completely unprepared. Still, the fighting swayed back and forth. For 2 days, the Crusaders assaulted the walls, and for 2 days they were held back. Raymond's tower was burnt to the ground, and many of the siege engines were smashed. But at last, Godfrey's tower reached the wall. Godfrey and Tancred were among the first across. The battle along the wall was hard fought. No grand strategy or clever maneuvers, just a desperate melee that resolved down to a few hundred instances of men locked in single combat.
Yeah, isn't Godfrey name means God's gift or something like that? So that's pretty appropriate, right? He's the first entering that.
But in the end, the Crusaders won out and opened the city gates. Now, with forces pouring in from all sides, the Muslim defenders broke and fled into the city. Victorious, the Crusader army began the biggest massacre the Holy Land had ever seen.
Why? Why every time? Why? You won, you took over the city, just fuck off from there, I guess. Why massacre every single civilian? This is what's problem with the religious war. If a war doesn't have a war of ideology or war of religion, war makes sense, right? You're trying to gain something, and once you gain it, you don't slaughter everyone, right? Once they give up, war is over. There you go, right? Those are now your subjects or whatever. When it's a religious war, every Muslim and Islamic guy has to die, give children and everything.
And women and children were slain as they ran through the streets. The chroniclers describe crusaders wading ankle-deep in blood through Jerusalem as they butchered all those they could find. Only the youngest of the crusading princes, Tancred, tried to stop the slaughter, going so far as to give a group of Muslims his banner and telling them to show it to anybody who came for them to let
Look at that. So Tancred is the one who has more sense in him. And Godfrey is the asshole, apparently.
Know that they were under his protection. But even this was futile. Tancred was called off to attend to some other part of the fighting, and when he returned, those he'd offered protection to were dead upon the mosque floor. There would be one more battle outside of Jerusalem, but this was pretty much it. That's how the Crusaders retook the Holy Land. And thus, the First Crusade ended.
Fuck. I don't know, man. This series started as pretty chaotic, fucked up thing, but I never really processed that. But yeah, from the start, this has been fucked up, right? Since this was 1,000 years ago, I guess we can laugh right now. But in the end, all those people's crusade, they basically massacred their own Christians, right? Their own towns and people. And the crusade came to the Jerusalem, and holy shit, they massacred everyone in the name of God. I mean, none of them really thought that we are on the God's crusade right now. I guess butchering everyone, God might not want that. I don't know. They probably just think that only God only acknowledge Christian. Every other Islamic or Muslims are not part of God's people or something. So God would be okay with it or something, because this is just fucked up, man. All those kids, children, and this happens every time, right? Ottomans, basically taking Constantinople in, I guess, 14th, 15th century. They probably did the same shit. Every religious war that ever was, there's always that kind of shit. And how many crusades were there? 4 or 5? God knows how many. The giant crusades we know of, there might have been small crusades that nobody even talks about. So how many crusades have there been? And in all of those crusades, entire population probably got slaughtered because it's about religion. Alright, people, they took over Jerusalem. Look at that. I wouldn't have thought of that from the first and second video, how catastrophic it was. But yeah, they took over Jerusalem because, Godfrey and, that other guy with the T, I forgot his name. Tancred, yeah. They were actually smart, right? So they actually took over. Where was Robert of Flanders, man? What, he took off in the end? Wasn't he with them too? I don't know. Alright, people, that was Europe, the First Crusade on to Jerusalem by the channel Extra Credits. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I guess comment down which next series should I, react to. I don't know, it's confusing. There's so many. Should I do the Justinian one? I don't know. We'll see. And yeah, I'll see you next time.